Taken as a whole, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond feels like something of a composite. On one hand, it's clearly a follow-up to 2007's Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, drawing close many of that game's greatest triumphs and fumbles with a fascinating reverence. On the other, it is something new for the series, structurally most comparable not to other Metroid games, but rather to a different Nintendo adventure franchise altogether. More on that shortly. Then there is how the game is built, feeling almost modular with different modes and moods of play stitched together with visible seams. With all that said, it certainly, at least broadly, works rather well. At the onset of Metroid Prime 4, bounty hunter Samus Aran finds herself called to the aid of the Galactic Federation once again. The Federation has in its possession some all-powerful ancient relic, and one of its bases is under attack from space pirates who also want the MacGuffin. In the course of the ensuing battle, the relic ends up getting activated, if that's the right word. The long and short of it is that it sort of explodes, sending out a wave of energy that transports Samus and others beyond to an unknown, far-flung planet. This is the setup you need to understand, in short, to grasp Metroid Prime 4's structure. Once stranded, Samus's iconic ship is gone, for instance. There's no planet hopping to be done here. Instead, she finds herself on a single world, which is, in a strange way, most reminiscent of the Legend of Zelda's Hyrule, specifically that of an older entry like Ocarina of Time. Think of it this way, Prime 4's rolling desert is functionally Hyrule Field. That is to say, a relatively sparsely populated map that serves to connect more explicitly themed biomes at the extremes of the world. There are, essentially, 5 locales joined by the desert, locations which act like dungeons in the finest Zelda tradition, but in a Metroid style. Think of Viola, Samus's new bike, as Epona then, used to quickly ferry yourself from one side of the desert to the other, and think of the giant tower in the middle of that desert as Ganon's castle, curious, always looming, but blocked by a force field and inaccessible until the endgame. In the dungeons, the classic Metroid Prime action reigns. You'll enter a zone, explore, take on enemies, solve small puzzles, and eventually pick up some sort of new ability. Said ability is then inevitably used to open up progression-critical areas of the dungeon you couldn't previously access, and then is used to defeat the dungeon's boss. At this point, you're free to leave and move on to the next area. There's a bit of classic Metroidian backtracking mind, so after finishing Dungeon 3 you can go back to Dungeons 1 and 2 with its item to get into extra rooms to find new puzzles and bonus items. Some of this is entirely optional, while other parts are required by the narrative. This sort of backtracking has been present in Metroid ever since 1986, but a funny thing about how it's presented here is that it's also reminiscent of another Zelda game, and so the comparison continues. Specifically, the way you go back and forth between slightly larger spaces and gradually push slightly deeper into them to progress the story, similar to Skyward Sword. So too is one of Prime 4's 2 new gimmicks. Its big new weapon greatly resembles that game's Beetle, where you fire a projectile and manually steer it through the air. This is used to great effect in numerous puzzles and by a couple of bosses. The other big new gimmick is Samus's psychic powers. These don't amount to much revelatory in gameplay terms, manifesting platforms or grapple points out of thin air here, a bit of telekinesis there, but it's a nice bit of colour ability-wise. Most of the other skills unlocked are variations on familiar Metroid offerings, be that known quantities with the word psychic grafted on the front for some reason. For instance, the psychic boost ball is functionally identical to the boost ball you know and love, or more missile-based variations on elemental beam weaponry. When you're spelunking in those dungeons, the hours just melt away. Much as with the selection of abilities, there's nothing planet-shakingly new here, but what is here is a very confident expression of what made the previous Metroid Prime games great. The standout is probably how each level subtly changes. A theme of Prime 4 is that each area is somewhere of importance to an ancient long-extinct race, and you're cobbling together keys and items from their time in order to find a way off-planet again. In multiple instances, your main task in each dungeon is to find and restart its power generator in order to gather the stuff you need, but when you do that, each dungeon shifts.
Solid work, Samus. Power's back online. Feels like the heat is too. Might be what's drawing those strange creatures. You'll be able to use that elevator now. It'll give you access to the deepest level.
It's good atmospheric work. It demonstrates well that Prime 4 is probably the best ever looking Nintendo game, at least as far as games with semi-realistic art styles go. On Switch 2 at 4K and 60 FPS, it's a pretty remarkable looker too. It's less so on the 120 FPS mode, and Metroid is not a game built with twitchiness in mind, so while that option is appreciated, 60 FPS is probably the way to go, maximising the visual splendour on offer.
I've never seen anything like this. It's beautiful.
We can't speak of the atmosphere though without addressing the chatty elephant in the room. Samus is not on this mysterious planet alone. 5 Federation Space Marines got zapped to the planet at the same time as Samus, and each dungeon will have you link up with at least one, helping and rescuing them.
Please get me down.
This is a Metroid game where you have allies, and those allies actually build a home base you'll regularly return to as the story progresses. Some items you find can be equipped on your own right away, but in other cases you'll need to return to base to have your resident engineer pass and install it. There's going to be a lot of debate about these Marines. Some will find them annoying. Engineer Miles McKenzie, the one from the previews, becomes a Navi-style figure, staying home at base but ever present over the radio.
If you're not sure where to go, you can always call in and ask me. You can reach me through the radio command on the map.
But what's more jarring is how the narrative introduces a range of verbose allies for Samus to recruit and lead, whilst insisting that the hero remains deathly silent. They chatter to her, or rather at her, and she regards them with a stony-faced silence. Even her body language is less characterful than in 2021's excellent Metroid Dread. It just feels weird.
Hey, stay safe out there, Samus. I'll be here if you need me.
The central desert, which you'll be crossing often as you go back and forth between the main areas, is fun enough. Viola, the bike, is a blast to drive, with a few fun and simple mechanics to experiment with. The desert does give the impression, though, that it was designed separately from the rest of the game, perhaps even outsourced to a different team. Even the loading zones seem to suggest this, as it doesn't even directly connect to the dungeons. In each case, there's a loading zone, then a tiny staging area that you can cross in about a minute, and then the dungeon. There's a handful of things to do out in the desert, but the list of things is very short indeed, all being honest. There's a few little underground shrines you can unlock, just like Zelda again, that each bequeath an upgrade to one of your primary weapons. There's some stranded Federation gear you'll need to collect later in the game, and then there's green crystals which you can drive through to satisfyingly smash, which in turn is required for a few upgrades. The desert crossing is the sort of thing that could easily be supremely crap, but mercifully it works because the bike is fun to use, so it's a shame it's only used twice in the dungeons. It would have been nice to see it become more of a staple. All of this descriptor helps you to sense the curious thing at the centre of Metroid Prime 4. To some degree, it is Metroid Prime by the numbers, a familiar follow-up to the previous games. In other ways, it has quite a bit new to say, though largely with concepts and structures borrowed from elsewhere. This is the most difficult sort of game to review, by the way. The sort of thing you enjoy a great deal in the moment that nevertheless feels rather bland in the retelling. Part of this lack of enthusiasm no doubt has a lot to do with its final stages. Once you've finished all 5 main dungeons, there's a fair amount of busy work. Everyone is familiar with the late game mop-up, but to continue the Zelda analogies, this is Triforce Piece Hunt nonsense. Those green crystals you smash in the desert, you seemingly have to shatter a certain amount of those to trigger the endgame. So if you've done everything else, you will be forced to drive loops of the desert smashing crystals before you can trigger the end. It's like if GTA asked you to knock down a certain number of lampposts to unlock the next mission. When the time finally comes to trigger the end, that feels underwhelming too. If you were expecting a big finale with payoffs for what the game had built up so far, a thrilling final series of challenges to make use of all the skills you've acquired, forget it. Instead, without mentioning any embargoed specifics, that enticing tower that's been teasing you all game ends up being a totally mechanically straightforward anti-climax. No matter how much you enjoy the gameplay part, there's nothing more disappointing than finishing a game that's relatively narratively driven and thinking, that's it, at the credits. Metroid not being narratively focused isn't an excuse either. Remember that sense of narrative satisfaction from ushering that baby Metroid to safety in black and white without any dialogue back in 1993? A naff ending isn't the end of the world, obviously, but in Metroid Prime 4, it forms part of an overall pattern of mild disappointments in the face of some otherwise excellent, easily lovable stuff. Metroid Prime 4 is one of those games that is, excuse the cliche, less than the sum of its parts. You'll enjoy your time with it. When you're deep in those dungeons, the design is snappy and confident and the atmosphere impeccable, even in the company of chatty NPCs. Puzzly boss encounters where you die once but use that death to download a strategy before wrecking the boss on your second attempt are each a delight. These things are glimpses of vintage Metroid, but the way it all stitches together just isn't. In fact, those heady highs serve to really emphasise how this game could have, and perhaps should have, been so much more. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond then is a solid outing for Samus, but you'll need to take the rough with the smooth. 3 out of 5.
Mark 99 Meg, this is Samus Aran. Bounty Hunter, you know her. She's famous.
Thank you so much for watching this video review of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. If you enjoyed it, please do give it a like and consider subscribing to Eurogamer for almost daily videos about video games. Goodbye.